Hello. So basically, I can't remember if I mentioned this in the last video and probably a few videos before it as well. But I'm still trying to do the essay and I've decided to start it again. So it's basically on Wittgenstein, where everyone cannot speak, there everyone must be silent. How should this statement be understood? And we've got to discuss the distinction between what can be said and what can be shown that Wittgenstein makes in the Tractatus. And so I've read the Tractatus several times and I've highlighted, what I say highlighted, underlined. I say underlined, there's barely an underlining, there we go. Some important information, and I've started reading this as well, The Enchantment of Words, which is a secondary text to the Tractatus, and it's supposed to be easier to it's supposed to give you a greater understanding of the Tractatus, but I find it quite hard to actually get my head around, especially the formal logic stuff. I mean, it's good to actually read some parts of it. Anyway, some of it is a bit abstract, and I think I need to nail down the concepts a bit first. And I have to remember this is an undergrad essay, so it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be great. It's just going to be good enough. But yeah, I just wanted to figure out Russell's paradox, and obviously, because as far as I'm aware, one of Wittgenstein's goals within the Tractatus is to resolve Russell's paradox. So I probably won't be able to explain Russell's paradox very well, but he works on a Phrygian framework. Is it Frege? I think it's Frege. Okay, so Fragerian framework. Um, and Frege was basically, let me just check the name of that. He was someone who reformed logic, um, in a certain way. And there was an example in the book about horses. Wait a minute. I can't even see his name anywhere. Pretty sure it's Frege. Oh, Frege. I don't know how to say that. Is it Freak? I don't know. Anyway, he reformed logic, and I don't know anything about logic whatsoever, because we haven't really done any formal logic. It's continental philosophy predominantly. So Frege, I'm gonna say, reformed logic in some way to encompass the specificity of words. Am I right in saying that? I'm not sure. So if I was to say somebody has killed somebody, it's like, well, we're using the same term, but the terms are meant to mean or symbolize different things. So for instance, somebody killed somebody. Are we referring to the same somebody each time? Are we referring to different somebodies, different people? And it's not necessarily clear just from the statement alone exactly what that means. So we have to, I guess, reformulate the structure of the sentence in order for it to make more sense and not cause these sorts of issues in logic. Because I guess the logical perspective on the world, is it logicism? I'm not sure. Basically states that everything can be understood through logic, or the clear, or if we apply logic to the world and get rid of typical everyday language, then we will be able to say things a lot more clearly, which seems to be the basis for Wittgenstein's Tractatus, because he wanted to say things more clearly. He wanted to find clear ways to express the states of affairs of objects in the world around us. Okay, so, and basically Wittgenstein thought that everything which can be said clearly, So that's sort of compatible with the logical view. Um, so and that's obviously something that can be said. So what sorts of things can be said? Well, things that can be said include, I don't know, I am sat on a sofa in a living room. Right, that can be said, can't it? I can't do this. That can obviously be said. Maybe not obviously, but for Wittgenstein, he would say that can be said because. Actually, maybe that's not the best thing to say because I is an ambiguous term. It refers to each subject individually. I could say there is like a horse in the room, and there obviously isn't a horse in the room. I've just got horses on my mind for whatever reason. And I guess that could be pictured, but then it's like, well, even that can't exactly be pictured because the room could be. Because how do I know that you're picturing the same room that I'm talking of? You don't. You know that from context. There would need to be further explanation in order to be able to specify that. Um, like as to what kind of room it is, and and the kind of room is important, and also the kind of horse. Like, do we mean a toy horse or a real horse? Like, that information is also important. Because it almost determines the meaning of the proposition in some ways. Because if you've got a toy horse in a living room, then that would probably be, expected. But if you've got like a real horse in a living room, that might be a little bit alarming. Um, because it's not part of everyday life. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. Wherever one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. I don't agree with that. I mean, I do agree with that. I think it's a logical statement, but I think it's not so clear exactly what cannot be spoken about. I think, well, okay, so let's say that the world does conform to logic, right? Can we prove that the world is logical? Can we say that the world is logical? Can we prove with logic that the world is logical? Do we not have to use a separate tool to be able to justify the logicality of the world with the use of logic? I don't even know if what I'm saying makes sense. Like, is that a right question to ask? Because I'm not very good at maths, and a lot of the formal logic stuff is mathematical. So let's say we've got a world, right? So this is our world. And then we've got logic, which is what our relationship to the world in some ways. So would we say the world is inherently logical, and then we don't create language, we express statements through the use of language, and depending on the logical form of the statements will depend on whether or not the statement is logical in accordance with the logicality of the world. And I think Wittgenstein's justification for the logicality of the world is he uses a net for it. So I think he said if you place a net over a picture, and it could be like hexagonal, or it could be like triangular or square. I'm not exactly sure if I understand this properly, but what I do understand from it, which could be wrong, is that when you put the net over the world, and each of the pieces of the net, each of the geometrical shapes of the net, covers a little piece of reality, and you can always describe each of those pieces of reality like a grid of some sort. And if you can describe each little piece, so we can describe the size of it, we can describe the colour of it, we can describe all of that, then we can do it for every other little piece as well, which means that we can describe the world of a whole in a logical way. And maybe we'd struggle to do that because of, I don't know, phenomenological restrictions or the capacity of our minds. But nonetheless, it is conceivable as being possible to describe the world in that sort of mathematical way, or scientific way, or whatever. So I would say that that's plausible, that it can be done. And I guess what we take from that is anything that doesn't perhaps fit into the net cannot be spoken about with propositions. That seems to be what Wittgenstein is trying to get at. So when you put a net over a picture, all you have is the physicality of things. All you have is what's visibly there. You don't have judgments, you don't have values or ethics. None of those are actually within the net. Okay? Even debatably beauty is also aside from the net as well. So those things are imposed upon the picture from the human mind, from the human psyche. It's something that we cannot speak of, and that is something that Wittgenstein does say. He says we can't talk about ethics, we can't talk about like values or aesthetics, because these things are beyond the realm of language, because the purpose of language is to mirror the world. It's to mirror reality. So anything which doesn't logically correspond with the net which has been placed over the picture, anything that doesn't fit into the picture just can't be explained through language. Okay, is the net am I misunderstanding the net? I could be misunderstanding the net, that's possible. So right, so I've described the net as something which you can place over a picture, and it compartmentalizes each part of the same picture into smaller pieces. But the net also has significance aside from the picture in some ways, because it's almost like the logical framework that we use to interpret the world. Right? So as far as I'm aware, the net has the same geometrical pattern running all the way through it. We can't interpret one part of the world with squares and then another part with hexagons, because they're different shapes, and I guess they're different logical tools. They abide by different logical rules. So would it make sense to apply different shapes to them? I'm not sure. I feel like there is probably some significance to the net, and maybe I'm reading this into it, but there needs to be some degree of continuity across the net, because then we're able to understand each other. So if I'm talking to you from the position of having a hexagonal net covering the world in the way that I see it, and you're talking to me from the perspective of having a square net over the world as you see it, then each thing you look at is going to be appearing differently to you, and we're not going to be able to communicate properly. And I don't know if that is what Wittgenstein means. I think it's probably more likely the former than the latter, but that's just something that I guess can read into it. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. There are probably things that we can't speak about. Can we speak about values logically? I'm not sure. Because it's like Hume's is-ought problem. So we have what is, and then it's almost impossible to derive an ought from the is. Because the ought is the value judgment which comes from us. It's not inherent within the thing itself. There's a gap there. There's not a direct connection between what is and what ought to be. It's more like something we draw, something we create. But I don't know. Could you not argue that there's if these things, even if these value judgments do exist within the human mind, that's going to get really complicated actually, because you can place the net over the brain, but the brain doesn't seem to be a very good measure of what the brain does. So we can look at the brain and it can tell us about the physicality of it, but ultimately consciousness feels kind of metaphysical. It doesn't. It seems to transcend just the flesh of the brain, if that makes sense. Even the way I see the world, it seems sort of metaphysical in some ways. The act of perception, which I guess you can't put a net over that because it's so transient. So anyway, I'm gonna cut this off because it's gonna cut out anyway. So thank you for watching.